You're listening to the Waypoint TV Podcast Network, brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors.
What's your favorite hunting tradition? Is it the thrill of the early morning, the sound of the woods coming alive? My personal favorite, the smell as the seasons change. Who was it that first took you out on your first hunt? Maybe it was your dad, a grandparent, a good friend. Hunting season is more than just a time of year. You know this. It's a way of life passed down through generations. And now it is finally here. Whether you're heading out for the first time or for the 50th, Academy Sports and Outdoors has everything you need to gear up for the field and do it for less. Find the ammo, shotguns, and rifles that fit your hunting style. Grab game cameras and camo to ensure you're fully prepared, all from the brands you trust, all in one place. Text HUNT24, that's HUNT24, to 22369. Again, 22369 to take $20 off your $100 purchase when you shop hunting supplies at academy.com. And if you need a hunting license, pick it up in store while you're shopping. It's just one more way Academy Sports and Outdoors makes hunting season easier.
Hey everyone, this is Captain Steve Roger from Into the Blue TV. And as soon as I feel a little break from this heat, I know that hunting season is upon us. Actually, the first time I ever went hunting, a buddy took me. Wasn't my father or my grandfather. In fact, I took my father on his very first hunt. Well, Academy Sports and Outdoor Stores has everything to gear up for the field for less. Plus, you can shop a wide selection of ammo, shotguns, deer corn, rifle, feeder, game cameras, camo, and more from the brands you trust. Text HUNT24 to 22369 to take $20 off a $100 purchase when you shop hunting supplies at academy.com. Need a hunting license? Pick it up in store while you're shopping.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, brought to you by Huntworth. Huntworth gear for all types of weather, all types of terrain, all types of budgets. It's clothing that just works. Check them out at huntworthgear.com. And right now they've got their 40% off sale on everything through, I think, December 3rd. There's a code right there on the page. And the Grayling hoodie and Elkins vest combo is my personal favorite. If you were going to pick up anything, those two are a great starting point. And definitely get over there and check that stuff out. Latitude Outdoors, their Black Friday sale is live now, and I would be looking at those Carbon SS sticks and that Ranger 22. But the Maverick, I almost skipped over that. It's a great value in and of itself, but for $160, a super simple, comfortable, just, very minimalist, easy to use saddle. The Maverick is, it just suits my hunting style perfectly. Very, very simplistic, and definitely go check that out. And that Ranger 11, that pack I think is on sale for just under $100 or just over $100. Great pack for those minimalist guys, and especially if you're running a tree stand. But saddle guys can use it too. So check that out at Latitude Outdoors. Special shout out to all of our sponsors, partners, Big Shot, Spartan Forge, Lucky Buck, Canadian Zinger. Those guys are amazing. Genesis 3D, all of those guys, definitely go support them. I know Spartan Forge has 30% off right now. And like I said, if you guys aren't looking at that LiDAR, you're really missing out. You're missing on some information that's pretty helpful. This podcast is with our buddy Jake Burghuis. He's one of these guys who just continues to kill big deer, and he doesn't give himself enough credit. He is, scouting and doing stuff with his dad and his uncle, and he's out there. I've scouted with him. I've hunted with him, and his approach kind of goes really well into this time of year. By instead of doing like the in-season scouting that we think of, he's using the rifle season and especially the muzzleloader season to get out there and do some in-season like pressured scouting, like where are these deer going once they're pressured. He kind of outlines how he's doing that, and it's pretty freaking cool to see, because I've seen it, the spots, and we'll get into it in the podcast about where he's hunting that just seem like, why would you want to hunt there? And then, go in there and lo and behold, there's deer there. And definitely something, especially for this time of year when a lot of guys aren't getting out in the woods, when guys are getting kind of down and they're maybe they feel like their season's over, that sort of stuff. It just kind of gives a new lease on life for this late season. That's not just, bed to food, all that sort of stuff. So definitely check that out. Also, if you're listening to this in real time, this is going to end Sunday, I believe, December 1st. Go over to the Overdrive Outdoors page. Josh is putting on the Answering the Call. It's a predator hunt, but you don't have to hunt. It's basically almost like a game dinner. That's benefiting 3 different charities and tons of prizes, a banquet, all that sort of stuff. And there's a limited amount of people. There's a limited amount of space. So definitely go check that out at the Overdrive Outdoors. It's the ATC charity hunt, Answering the Call. You can go to sportspersonministries.org and check that out. But definitely, if you're following along with us, you need to be checking out Overdrive Outdoors. Josh Mapes, great dude, doing great things, and killing a lot of deer also. So there's that. But like I said, this podcast, I think you guys are really going to like. Good discussion, and it's a take that I really haven't heard from anybody. And I think it can help a lot of guys. So as always, thank you guys for listening. Enjoy the episode. All right, everybody. Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And today I got my buddy Jake in studio, Jake Burghuis. And the past couple of years, he's killed some really nice deer, especially for the state of Michigan, but basically for anywhere. And it's like, oh my gosh. Who is this kid? What is he doing? How is he doing this? And we're going to get into some of that. And it's not, Jake's doing it as like a family thing. So it isn't like he doesn't want to make it sound like he's doing everything. But I don't think any of us are all doing it. I think everybody has a hunting partner, a group of people that they bounce ideas off of, unless you're like one of these super recluse guys. But I think that kind of like goes in line with, what we're doing here, in that, we're trying to have that deer camp feel, that hunting nostalgia, bringing back hunting camp, all that stuff. So without further ado, how you doing tonight, Jake?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So this guy's sitting. So I want to start right here by saying, like, the reason that I started hunting this year at the beginning with the stick bow is because Jake and I were supposed to start out the year and just kill fawns and button bucks with the stick bow. Is that not the conversation we had at the Total Archery Challenge?
Well, that's exactly how it started. But I mean, some deer came into the picture and I don't think I could shoot them with a stick bow. So, I mean, plans kind of changed faster than I expected.
But you didn't let me in on that. Well, I guess I was in Colorado too, so I got home and...
Well, I didn't let anybody know. I mean, that deer was just kind of like slid under the rug. So, I mean, it was just kind of like a last minute ordeal.
So, let's talk about, like, first of all, I have no idea how I met Jake. It was like shooting at the club or something. He just has always, ever since the first day, has been around. Like, oh, you want to go shoot bows? Like, yeah, okay. Hey, you want to go scouting? Like, okay. Hey, you're going to the TAC? I'm going to TAC too. I'll stay with you guys. Okay. Like, I don't know. So how did that all happen?
The first time that we all met would have been from Travis Johnson at the club when we went and shot at 5 spots the first time.
Yeah.
And that was just a terrible, terrible ordeal. And then ever since then, it was just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah. So, like, you growing up, like, what was, like, your, how old are you, first of all? And then, like, because, I mean, John just turned 50. I'm 43.
well, John's old enough to be my dad.
Yeah.
I graduated with his daughter.
Yeah.
But no, I'm 30. I just turned 30. So,
Okay. So, but like you growing up, you grew up in Michigan, hunting Michigan. Like, what was how did you grow up hunting? Was it like bait piles and all that, or like what was the hunting style of your dad and your uncles and the people around you?
So whatever like the legal age was, is when I started. I mean, on quotes, but I shot my first one with a bow over a bait pile whenever, like, because that was still legal then. But as far as like my dad was, I mean, you could say like the first generation of our family, because he didn't start until he was like 19 or 20, in that range. But like, I mean, same as me, he had good mentors and stuff like that, and then he kind of latched on. So, I mean, I shot my first one over bait, but after that, it's always just been like, you're out. I mean, even since I was a young kid, it was just we were out. We followed him around, or he toted us along. Same thing I do with my kid. And it just kind of was, I mean, you're hunting the deer. You're not waiting for deer to come to you. You're on the deer. So, I mean, it's been that way forever.
And do you gravitate like towards, swamps or, was it big woods or what it is? Because we'll get into it, but the spots that Jake picks out are absurd. So
it's mainly from what I've gathered and like what we've always hunted. There's some swamps, but mostly it's like big tracts of public land. And I would say 95% of it's just big wood stuff. All of it's basically flat.
So when you're going around with your dad when you were younger and you were learning and maybe you weren't even old enough to hunt, you're going around and you're looking at that type of stuff. Like what is it that you're keying in on in those areas, like in the beginning? Like, what is it that was like your dad was showing you, hey, you got to look at this or you got to look at this in this big monotonous timber?
The biggest takeaway, and it's still the same thing that I gravitate towards now, is edges. Like, it's all edges. Because you got to find something that breaks up a big tract of land. Because the deer aren't just going to wander through the middle of the woods for no rhyme or reason. I mean, they will after dark. I mean, that's how you find all the scrapes and all the rubs that are just in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So so you shot your first deer over bait.
Yep.
And that was, 12 years old, whatever.
Yeah.
And then what's it been like hunting since then? Was it always, I mean, I feel like nowadays, and I think maybe for me, this trip to Tennessee was like, I don't know, kind of like the opposite of like kind of where everybody's gravitating. You're looking for bigger deer, you're looking for big bucks. And like when we were there, we were looking for big bucks, but the buck that I shot there wasn't big, but it was exciting. It was fun. Me and Eric had been on X amount of hunts and never killed anything. So it was like, we're going to kill a buck this time. But was it for you guys? And I know your dad has killed big deer, and definitely you're sending me pictures of deer that he's passing this year. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? Was it always big bucks, or was it just get out there and hunt? What was the like mindset going into it?
For him, like
but you and like what he kind of imposed on you.
Oh, we like shot everything. Like even when I was a young kid, before I could even hunt, like, and I went with him, it was like a legal buck came through, and it didn't matter if it was like a 3-point or a 4-point or 6-point. He'd look at me and I'd be like, can we shoot that? And he was like, yeah, we'll shoot that. And then he would shoot it. Like, but he like with, it's always been just, I mean, I shoot whatever, but like the big deer thing for me didn't come about until 2020. Like when I sold everything and then just went straight to deer hunting. But as far as like as a group, it didn't matter. Like big deer didn't matter. Everybody's at like a different point in this whole deal. So like I could still be shooting 4 points and he wouldn't care. But he was always shooting like bigger deer, you know, because I've always felt like he was kind of like one of the OGs that like nobody ever kind of heard about deal. Like just slid under the radar. But yet, like when you walk into the house and you just see deer everywhere and you're like, oh, maybe he's got it figured out.
And so for you in 2020, what changed like for as far as like big deer and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. You know, what made that change? Because I think like, you know, there are people who it's great, honestly, but who are like unapologetically like, I don't care. I'm just going to go shoot. I'm going to go have fun.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to shoot deer. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to do what I like to do. And then there's other people in like with Frank, right? So Frank's trying to kill a big deer in Ohio. In Michigan, he's a little bit less selective. He'd like to kill a big deer, but he's like, I've killed so many deer. Like, I know how to hunt deer. Like, don't tell me how to hunt, you know, like, and it's like, but you haven't really killed a big deer in Michigan, you know, and then, you know, there's a lot of guys that haven't, and it's just, you know, I never have opportunity, so I'm just going to kill what comes up. So for you, like, what changed, or like, why did that switch happen?
Like the biggest thing is when I had the kid, and like I sold, like I had too many, like flames or whatever, iron. Yeah. Oh yeah, way too many hobbies as far as like dirt bikes and so on and so forth. So like I came to a conclusion with my wife, because I'm like, I can't do everything. And I was like, well, if I get rid of one, I'm going to like go all in on the other. And that's just kind of like the type of person that I am, because I couldn't be all in on both. So I said, I'll get rid of all the dirt bikes, everything, and then I'll just go deer hunting, like 365. And that's what it's turned into. Is, I mean, you've noticed it's just deer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think again, like kind of to that point, like archery as well, because like that's one thing about Jake is like watching him shoot. Like he'll send me groups, like he'll send me like a 6-inch group at like 110, and he's like, yeah, the bow's shooting okay, you know. And it's, you know, we go out to the Total Archery Challenge, like same thing. Like I can't believe that you didn't put some in for the truck, but you know, that's a whole nother story.
But it's not always been like that either, because I mean, I've had a lot of great opportunities on big deer that I've messed up on because I shoot like terribly. And I got to the point to where I was like, well, I don't want to be like that. And then I've found a love in just like shooting my bow all the time. And to get really good at it is, I mean, like I'm not great, but like in like that whatever, you know, upper
hunter class for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah. And like to see how far I've come since the first time that we all shot, you know, flat face targets together, that was terrible, and now it's not even an issue.
Now I want to go back to the big deer thing, because you have a pretty interesting story of was that your first like really big deer?
Well, that was like my first buck with a bow.
Your first buck with a bow. What did that buck score?
Just shy of 165.
And so, did you know that deer existed?
No, not a chance.
Okay. So, the only reason that I ask, well, I'll ask it at the end. So, take us through that hunt if you didn't know that this deer existed.
So, I didn't know that this deer, like, was even alive. I didn't know deer were that big. But we had, at my old house prior, back in like 2011, whatever, I had like 20 acres that I could hunt across the street. So it was just like an after school spot. So I get home from school and I'm like, well, it's that time of year. I'm like, I'll just go run out there. Like I already had a preset spot, everything all set up. So I run out there thinking like I'd only ever see does and maybe like a spike horn here and there. And like, don't get me wrong, I was going to shoot a spike horn. But so I'm sitting there and it's like 6:30.
So what's your equipment at this point? Like your bow and what is your setup?
I mean, it's not like I've always had decent stuff. So it was just like a Hoyt, like a newer Hoyt at that point in time. And then I don't know what like terrible lock-on tree stand was there. And then like, the old like ladder step sticks, like that's what it was. And then I just run up there, like clip into my safety harness and then hang my bow and like we're good. And so I'm sitting there and like off in like this little thicket part that's in front of me, there's a doe, like 2 deer come walking through there. And I'm like, oh, there's deer. I'm like, all right. So I'm still sitting there watching, and out around this edge, like in between me and like this tall, like power line grass, whatever, this doe comes working out. And I'm like, oh, she's like 35 yards, 30 yards. I was like, I could shoot her. And for some reason, like, she's just acting super weird. So I turn around and I see that buck standing out in the middle of this field. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to shoot him. Like, I don't care. I'm like, this doe, she's behind me, but I'm like, forget her now. So I'm like, what can I do to get him to come over? So I grunted at him. And he like looks, and he's probably 80, 90 yards out there. And he just doesn't care. So what's the old-fashioned doe bleed deal?
The can call?
The can call. So like I go flip that a couple times. He doesn't care about that. And I'm like, well, I mean, like all those guys on TV, like they snort wheeze at deer. I'm like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? He's going to run off. Like never had a shot at him anyways. So I snort wheeze at him. And I've never like had a deer come unglued like this, still like yet in my life, to where he came from like 80, 90 yards to 7 in like the blink of an eye, like all pissed off. He had like 10 yards of like, like the old, like the pine rows that are all like just dead trees under the bottom side. Well, he either like had to walk around that, or he had to come straight through. And I'm like, well, he's going to walk around. He's going to walk around. No, he like ducks his head down there and he's just thrashing, like breaking everything he can. And he just walks right down all the way to 7 yards. And I can't even draw my bow. So I'm sitting there and we're having like a standoff, even though like he doesn't know I'm there. And so it's probably 5 minutes goes by. He like figures out that doe's standing there the whole time. He spins out. As soon as he spins out, I draw back and he makes it to like 12 yards. And then I shoot him at 12 yards. He takes off running and stops at 30. And he's just standing there. I'm like, I swear I just hit him. Like my Luminoc like blitzed right through him. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to shoot him again. So I draw back and then I shoot him again and he takes off running. And I call my dad and like, I mean, you've met my dad. He's just pretty like nonchalant, like easygoing. And I'm like, hey, like I just shot a big deer. And he's like, really? Like, yeah. He's like, all right. He's like, I'll grab my stuff. And he's like, I'll just come out there and get you. I'm like, all right. He's like, how big is it? And I'm like, oh, like, I don't, like one of the big ones you have on the wall. Like, I didn't know the whole score thing yet. And I really didn't care. And he was like, all right. So I get off the phone with him, and no more than I get off the phone with him, it starts pouring. So back then, I was just shooting like fixed blade broadheads, and he had to go through a bunch of pines. So pines does with blood, like. So we tracked him, and then we lost everything. So we like packed it in for the night. I skipped school the next day, and we didn't find him. We searched all the next day, like chilled out because he was working nights at that point in time, so he went to work that night, and then he got up. We did some more looking, and then it was probably like 24 hours later. He's like, I had a couple buddies come out. We were good searching. He's like, I'm going to go check one other spot. He's like, right behind the neighbor's house. He's like, all the deer, like a lot of deer just hanging out right there. I'm like, all right. He calls me and he's like, hey, I found your deer. And I'm like, all right. And he says, how big did you say that deer was? And I'm like, oh, dude, it's like that big one you have on the wall. And he's like, you're an idiot. He's like, this is bigger than any deer on like anybody's wall. I'm like, oh, I get over there. And the whole story about that one is like on that phone call, he says, by chance, did you know that this deer had tags in its ears? It's like, no, not at all. I wasn't looking at that. So, I mean, I went over there and like when I seen it, I was like, dude, this is big. And like, I couldn't believe it.
So, like, then, you know, you shoot a deer that is obviously like a escaped deer farm animal or something. What is the next process? Like, do you have to call the DNR? Do you try and track the people down? Like, what happens?
So that was like early Facebook days. So my mom like posted a picture of this thing. You know, I don't know about like, I mean, big deer, like they spread pretty fast. So the pen that it came out of, they actually called like my dad. And I mean, long story short, like nothing. They just needed a couple things out of it. Like they can't do anything about it because it's like once it's out, like 24 hours after or whatever, it's basically a wild deer. They just needed like the brainstem, like odds and ends stuff out of that. But as far as that, like it just went straight to the taxidermist and they dealt with that.
Did they have any like backstory or anything of like how it got out or what happened?
Like, so I've heard like a couple different stories about that, but like from what like I've gathered from them is like somebody left the gate open and like supposedly he got out like 2 weeks before season, but like we've had like after you shoot a deer like that, people like come out of the woodwork. So like they had people like a mile down the road one way, like to the west, and then like a mile to the east. Like they've all had pictures of him because he was just like roaming around.
And you didn't have any trail cam pictures? You had like no idea going out there?
No, I didn't use like back then. We weren't really like trail cameras were there, but they weren't like what they are now.
Right. So did that like I haven't been to that point yet. I mean, you saw like I killed the one in Ohio, and you know I look at that deer, it's like 150, and I'm like, I'm not going to kill a bigger deer than that. Like, I mean that's going to be tough to beat, you know. So I just go out and I just have fun shooting, like whatever. And so, you know, as a kid shooting a pen deer that's roaming around, like did you become jaded? Do you think you were like the coolest guy in the world, that you were this great white hunter, or like did it affect you? How did it affect you?
I wouldn't say like it affected me too much because like that same year I tagged out on bucks like the last day of gun season by shooting a spike. Like you shoot a 165 and then you shoot a spike round. Like I didn't care. Like I mean, like at that point in time, I mean we were shooting like a bunch of deer. Like it didn't matter to me. It was just deer hunting, you know. Like, oh, I got lucky, so I didn't like put anything in it. And then like the big thing to where it changed is that following year is when I went to Illinois. And that's when like you actually got to see big deer and a lot of big deer. And like the first realization of that was my dad shot his big 8 like on the second day, and I'm like, I don't think deer like got that big. Like you'd see it on TV and everything else, and I seen a deer down there that made like my 165 or like that 155-inch 8-point that he shot look small, and I'm like, oh, this is where we're at.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? Like I remember going like the first hunt, like the first sit that I had in Ohio. Like Frank and I drove down there. Frank and John's brother Dan and PJ, those guys had gone down there and scouted like in April, and they were like talking about the deer that they saw and and like the sign and all this stuff. And literally the first deer that I saw was, I think, bigger than any deer I'd ever seen in Michigan. And it wasn't like a monster. It was like a, 120, 130 inch 10-point. And that was the first deer that I saw. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
okay. Like it changes like your perception of like that there are those deer like running around and that they're like attainable.
Yeah. And it's hard to say because it's not like, not until the last like 4 or 5 years that like I would get into deer around here like that I would see down there. And like to see a deer that went like north of 180, I was just like, okay, now we're getting into something. But that didn't change like how I hunted here. Because, even before we left to go down there, like, I'm a firm believer in like stacking bodies. Like, you got to shoot a lot of deer. And my dad's like the same way. So it was like the 3 days before we left, I shoot a doe. And then right behind that doe, I shoot like a 3-point. And then I go down there and I'm just chasing like giants. And down there, like my dad's like, it's my first time out of state. And you're like hunting big deer. And my dad's like, all right, these are the ones you can shoot. And these are the ones you can't shoot. And I shot a deer that was like in between the middle of both of those.
So like in the last like 4 or 5 years, so 2020 on, you've killed some really nice bucks here in Michigan. And, last year, like we were going back and forth and you had sent me to a spot and, you're like, I had a bunch of deer around here. I don't know if you saw the buck that I seen or if you had, just seen deer there, but you're like, hey, go to this spot. So I was like, oh, okay. And, I had like a, over 100-inch 8-point come in behind me and I had like a marginal shot and I didn't take it because I was leaving for Kansas like literally the next day. And it was like way back in there, no service, no help, no nothing. But like, I swear to you, like, and it's kind of like what stemmed this podcast. People have asked, because because of the buck you killed this year for sure, but the last couple of years you've just been, collecting these big deer. They're like, well, how does Jake scout or whatever? But like that day, I'm walking back in there and I'm like, I like get to the pin or like, and he's like, you need to be like 70 yards off of this pin. And I'm like standing there and I'm looking around and there is nothing. There is zero. There's not a deer track. There's not a rub. There's not a scrape. There is literally nothing. And like I went in there on a good wind. Like I accessed it. Everything was right. And I'm like, and this is in the boonies, like in the way back of nowhere. And like, I keep thinking like, I'm going to get to this, Jake just had mentioned edge. Like I'm going to get to an edge. I'm going to get to something. And there's like nothing except for, I guess there is one little piece of, like elevation. And then maybe it did get thicker, but it was so late in the year that there was no leaves or no anything. So it didn't look like that. And I'm like, I got gar hold. He's like, yeah. He's like, yes, I'm going to send him to the good spot, like way out. Want my pins, motherfucker. like here you go. And, man, I didn't even get set up, and I had 2 does go by, and I'm texting him, I'm like, where did you send me? Like, what? He's like, just, it's okay. So like, when you're like, how are you scouting? Like when you're going, and I've scouted with Jake, and he's like in the same boat as me, or I would tell this to anybody, is that you have to go out with different people and see what other people see, so you can kind of learn the way that, you know, how other people are successful. And it's one thing to listen to it like this, but it's another thing to actually go out and see it like for yourself. So when you're out there, like, what are you like looking for? Like, how do you break down? Because there's no freaking way that I would have ever set up there if you wouldn't have. I would have walked by that a million times.
What time of year, like, are you talking about, like, for scouting it?
Well, I'm just saying, like, your whole like thought
Like
process.
when I found that spot?
Yeah. So I think that's relevant to like this time of year, right?
Yeah. Well, I found that spot this time of year, like the year prior. Because, like, you know how, like, that area, without giving a bunch of it away, like, everything is blocks, right? So it doesn't matter how big it is. Like, yeah, it could be 500 or 600 acres, right? But if you break it down into that block and you only run that block before you, like, move on to the next, is so, like, how I would do it is I'd either, depends on which way the wind's blowing, because normally I'm doing it with a gun, right? I'm not going to shoot anything.
Yeah. So talk about that, like that mentality, right? Because I don't think a lot of people do that. I think, and it's interesting because, like, once we got back from Tennessee this year, it was like right in the heart of like when the gun season was going on. But I really truly believe that, like, after the first weekend, and for certainly the first week, like, everything goes back to normal. So if you were like a serious bow hunter, you probably have like a quarter of those guys still hunting.
Yeah.
And that's it. So like doing in-season scouting, like almost after season, is what you're doing, right? So what's your thought process there?
Yeah. So basically, I'm finding the deer where the deer are when they're like the most pressured, right? I mean, they're just getting hammered on by God knows how many people are out there. So, like, my thought is if I can, like, or like, because I learned all this from my dad, is if we can find them now, you can definitely find them, like, when I sent you in there, like, the first week of November, because I didn't sit that. But, like, all the spots that I already had prior weren't producing, so, like, you got to start bouncing around. And I hunted it, a couple days before you did, and I had 20 some deer in there, you know, a couple small bucks and then a bunch of does. But like when I found that, the reason why I found it is because I found deer. So like I'll take a spot like that that's just a rectangle chunk, and I'll start from like one corner on that backside. So just say, you know, the wind's blowing from to the north, right? So you just stand on the south end side of it, and I just work my way all the way through, just zigzagging across. And like the big thing with phones is before you could never do any of this, like back even when I started venturing off on my own, like you just had a compass and then you had to keep everything upstairs, right? Like with my phone, I can run tracks, and you've seen my phone. It's a mess. And like I'll just run zigzag tracks all the way across it, and then I'll start marking runways, like anytime I come across like big rubs. And then scrapes are iffy depending on what they are, as far as like, I mean, everybody's found, you know, your normal everyday scrapes that are like on the edge of the 2-track and stuff like that. Like the scrapes that I'm mainly looking for they're big, and in big woods, I mean, they got to be big, and they've been noticeable. Like as far as, like, I mean, there's a handful of ones that I've sent you videos of or whatever that are just bare dirt that are dished out like the size of a car hood that have been there. So that's like anytime, like I'll zigzag through, and you can find when you're doing that, like a bunch of edges. So all the edges that run like strips across, like that run like say north and south across this whole track. And so I'll just keep jumping and you'll start finding runways. Well, it'll help because I'm going to jump over to that next section too after I get done. So like I'll zigzag through, I'll mark all this stuff down, and then I'll just do the same thing I just did on the next chunk over. Because a lot of the stuff I hunt's big chunks. I mean, 20,000 acres in that ballpark. So, I mean, you got a lot of room to get lost. And, like, with that spot, I came up and around because, like, there's that little hill that's probably, 300 yards away that drops off into that bottom. Well, I come up to start working my way down. And there's a little bit of an edge that's there. And you can see it pretty good because they select cut that back in the day. So like there's a lot of them, what do you call whatever they're like their brows and stuff like that. And like you'll just roll up on top of that edge, and I just started bumping deer and bumping deer and bumping deer. And I'm like, well, if they're in here, that's second week of gun season, pretty sure they're going to be in here, that first week when they start getting pushed around. Because I don't know if you noticed, there's not that many people that walk that far. Mm-hmm. And you can get into some decent stuff. And, like, that's what starts. Like, how I start going, depending on how gun season ran. So, like, this year, like, I would have started that, like, last weekend. But with the whole stick bow thing, I kind of ruined that. But, so it's just like, I don't ever sit during gun is the biggest thing. Because, like, you've met me, I'm like 280D, like, I got to be moving.
Well, he's got 2 Zins in and a bang in the console and one in his pocket pretty much all together. So that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. I'm always like that. So even if I didn't.
So I think that's I've heard a lot of guys, like, when it comes to, like, swamps and all this stuff, David Riley comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
About, like, just making the perimeter and then finding something good and kind of diving in a little bit. And I think that approach probably works really good for swamps because it's thick and there's travel routes through the swamp that make the most sense. And so for big woods, like that monotonous stuff, and I mean, when I say monotonous, it's like everything is the same. Like I got, without like giving away too much, like it's like the worst place to hunt, it seems like. So it seems like you almost have to do that. And so, like, with muzzleloader and snow, I guess I just always put those two things together. Like, that seems like a much better way to kind of break it down, like the way that and I think that a lot of people wouldn't do that. I mean, even not that they wouldn't do it, but they wouldn't even think to do that. So that's like why I wanted you to come on here and kind of talk about that, because it sounds like, with you, and you're like, well, I just go out like during gun season and walk around with my rifle, and then you're really essentially scouting, and you might shoot a doe or something to fill the freezer. So when did that start? Or like, when did that actually, like, when did you start to adopt that as like a practice?
Whenever they decided to make gun season like 2 months long. So what, 2020, somewhere in that region?
Yeah.
Is like, the thing that really did it is I shot a doe Christmas morning. So like the first year that I had my son, I dropped him off at my parents' house at like 8 o'clock. And I'm like, I'm just going to go like walk around in the woods. And we had snow. And like, I just started doing my normal, right? As far as like, I'm just going to like aimlessly walk in the woods. And I make it like, dude, it's like 9 o'clock. I start walking out at 9:15. Like, I'm walking back to my truck at 9:30 because I already shot a doe. And I'm like, you can find like a lot of stuff just doing this super quick. And then I also get to like use the excuse that I get to hunt. So it's like, I do, like, don't get me wrong, I do like a lot of scouting and stuff in the summer. But most of my scouting is this time of year. Because, like, I mean, you got to balance it for the most part. Like, my wife's cool because I'm like gone all the time. Like, you know that. But as far as, like, I can't take my kid in the dead of winter. Like, I'm just not going to, like, put him through that. And then I'm not bringing him out there during gun season. Like, that's not going to happen. So, like, I can get a lot more done efficiently, like, when I'm just on my own and I can, like, raw. Like, everybody talks about speed scouting. Like, that's kind of basically what that is. Because I'm never, like, I never, like, say that, oh, I'm going to just go out here and, like, walk around and, like, I'll shoot a doe. 90% of the time, like, I don't even see deer. I'm blowing everything up that I can. And, like, I'll blow it up and I'm just going to find, like, that one little section in that whole, like, rectangular square block. But I only need to find that one section, and then I can come back through in the summer, you know, in the spring, wherever, you know, leading up to find out what's in there for food. And, like, to go back to, like, just how all that started is, like, COVID came about, so I was like, well, I can use a gun. I can use a muzzleloader, because they started muzzleloader. You can use it till, like, the end of the year. And then the year after that, it turned into, you can just use your deer rifle. And so, like, my dad and me used to go out, like, Black Friday and just, like, wind bump sections to just, like, go shoot does. And then, like, I'd just go off by myself, and then, like, it just never turned into hunting. Just all scouting is what it turned into doing.
So do you think, I guess for you, having done this and doing scouting, you know, summer scouting, preseason scouting, and this is like a whole nother take on, like, in-season scouting, because, you know, when you listen to, like, I feel like when podcasts on the topic, like, first started, and everybody was, like, trying to figure out what Dan Infalt and Johnny Eberhart and what all these guys are doing. And, you know, Johnny Eberhart, he's saying, you know, as soon as the season ends, like, that's when I start my scouting. But nobody's really talking about doing it in season. And I really like everybody says in season scouting, oh, find the hot sign. And then after the season, you know, you're still kind of guessing at, like, when the sign was made. And, like, when you're doing it, like, right now, like, if you, and, you know, granted, we're very, you know, bow season heavy, right? But at the same time, like, if you were, and I think about this, like, all the time, like, now being, like, I guess, like, having some sort of direction or, like, understanding about hunting deer and hunting bucks and all that stuff. Like, if I was to, like, go out with a gun, like, during gun season, or even, like, right now, and try and find a deer with a muzzleloader or something, buck that I wanted to kill, like, I think you could be pretty successful, because I don't think there's a lot of guys in the woods right now. And, like, when you find the sign that's fresh, like, that deer's alive and you can still shoot them, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And you don't have to be, you know, 30 yards and in or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think that approach of doing it, like, in season, and especially if you're a guy that still likes to gun hunt and muzzleloader hunt and all that stuff, I mean, I think it's, like, an excellent strategy, instead of just sitting there, you know, still trying to hope, right?
And yeah, because, like, I mean, you know that too. Like, I normally write my season off, like, that after that first week, or, like, Thanksgiving week of gun season. Like, after that, like, if, like, last year I only shot that one buck, I'm like, well, after that, like, it's basically done for me. So like when it's done for me, it just rolls right back into like this, like for this year, for instance, right? Like, so all the stuff that I'm doing now isn't for this year. Like, it's all next year. So it's like, I don't have any buck tags right now anyways, but like I always just like, I'm always moving, looking forward till next year. And then like, I'll even now, like I'll start bumping cameras. But as far as like, if you can find sign of deer, like, I mean, you could really get on some, because there's, what did I see? Like 3 people on Sunday when I went and hunted. Like there's nobody out.
So right now, when and I guess maybe not like, I guess your thought process as you're like going on, how much time are you spending in these areas, like year over year? You know, so like, again, like if we talk about, you know, the Eberhards and Infaults, Andy May, you know, they say, well, I got 30 spots and these are the spots that I have. You know, you got to have 30 places to check or X amount of places so that you're not hunting the same spot. Like, are you going back to the same spots over and over? And how many new spots? I mean, how are you like monitoring these? And I guess that's one thing where I think a lot of people struggle, is that if you have like, you know, and it always boggles my mind, you know, people are like, well, now my spot's blown up, you know, there's people in my spot, and it's like, there's a million other spots, but I think people get really hung up on one spot where the deer were good at this one time, and until this, and then my hunting all went to shit. You know, so how many places are you continually going back to those places and just verifying that they're good? Are you doing that in season, after season at this time, or are you continuing to go to new places every time each year?
So it's a mix of like all 3. So I have spots that like we've come to find out is you have spots that might not be good 1 year, but it might be good 3 years from now, right? And that's the biggest thing with like cameras. You can, I mean, they tell you everything you need to know. So we're always like, I'm always looking for new stuff. So like, even when I'm doing like my spring scouting too, like even after I like check all my spots that I have, that I'm like, okay, they have stuff that interests me, like I'll just keep moving, because I mean, the more spots that you have, I mean, the better the odds are. And as of like the last, well, since like 2020, somewhere in that time frame, like my dad's like kind of put this bug in my ear as far as like finding bigger deer. Okay, so you can go around and I could have, let's just say 5 deer that you would say that are like 3-year-olds, right? Well, you have 5 spots that have, you know, 5 3-year-olds, right? Okay, well, instead of those 5 spots that have 3-year-olds, he says, now just start looking for your 4-year-olds, or like your bigger deer, right? Because I mean, I hate to say it, but like 3-year-olds are like, I mean, they're around. They're a lot easier to find than, you know, your 4 and your 5s. So it's just kind of like an ad. Like, yeah, I've already got these deer that are like on the back burner, right? Well, let's go find more spots that have, you know, the deer that like I want to kill, like the deer that was this year's deer or like last year's deer.
And so just we only really talked about your pen deer, like the last 2 years, or I think 3 years really. Like, what did those deer score?
So we'll start with like 22. That was whatever that wide 8. So I mean, like 100 inches, somewhere in there, like a little bigger than that. Not a giant. And then last year's was just shy of 143. And then this year's was like in the 145, 146 ballpark.
Yeah. So I just want to give like a reference for like, you're like, not like Jake killed one out of a pen and he killed a bunch of spikes.
And like going on that as far as like between like the group, as far as that, I mean, like excluding that 8 point, like we've shot between like my dad and my uncle, we've shot like 4 deer since 21 that are like north of 130. And like the only one that was private was the one that I shot last year. So, I mean, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. But I think it just is like like I said, like a testament to like the system, right? Like what I'm talking about in that by looking at things like completely, I mean, I guess I just never have heard anybody talk about it that way, like doing it that way. Cause it's gotta be after the season, like as soon as the season's done, but I think that's just what's talked about. That's just the norm, right?
Yeah. And like, I mean, that's like the big thing is like in the winter, dude, I'm not scouting for deer. Like half the time we're always shooting. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I don't spend a bunch of time. It's cold. Like I work outside for a living. That's the last thing I want to do is hang out outside of work when it's freezing. So like if I can get everything that I want to get done, like before, like I don't really need to scout them in the winter. Because then I can just roll right on through to like late spring.
Well, and I think that, one thing that we like, it's kind of intuitive, but it's just something that we haven't really talked about is like, again, like if you talk about like the like public private piece that I've been hunting, the last few years, any of that sign like after the season, and especially like during like the time when you're shed hunting, is really hard to tell if that's where those deer like wintered or like when they all like found the food sources like in the winter. Yeah. And you can, if you're just looking at rubs and scrapes and things like that, then okay, they didn't do that like in the winter time, or like, through that period. But all the rest of that stuff, you're just kind of looking at like where they were most recently instead of like what they were actually doing. Yeah. And I think that's where like going out and, cause man, I could just think of like all the times like that I've hunted with Frank in the late season, and we just went and sat. We didn't go walk around or do like a 2-man push or anything like that. And I know guys that do that. But that seems like there's nobody out there. You're not gonna. It's not like you. It's like a courteous guy. You're like trying not to mess anybody's head up, but it's like really there's not that many people out there. Especially like to what we're seeing like in the like quote unquote good parts of bow season, right? Yeah,
and that's the biggest thing. Is, I mean, even the years like the early years, like when I started branching off and like running all this stuff, like when it was just me. And I didn't have, like, my dad with me or, like, my uncle with me. Like, you wouldn't see anybody. Like, I can count, like, one hand how many guys that I've ran across in the hundreds of miles that I've, like, spent doing this. And there's not a soul. And the biggest thing is there's not as many hunters as there used to be. Like, I don't think I've ran across... other than like opening weekend a rifle that I've ran across to anybody this year. Like I'll see him come driving in and out and stuff like that. But as far as me running across that or having people like run across my cameras, none.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I think this is really, I think it's really going to change the way that I'm kind of like looking at the late season now. And God, my wife would kill me if I shot a doe with a rifle.
Just don't shoot anything.
Well, I understand that, but I feel like if you I think what you said it there is like if you can actually use like it under the guise of hunting.
Yeah.
You know, because if like you go out there with a weapon, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah. But because if I would be like, hey, I'm just going to go wander around in the woods, like, no, you're not. But if I said, oh, I'm going hunting,
Yeah.
you know, but now she'd be like, what do we need the fifth deer for? Like, you know, whatever.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like,
she just doesn't ask questions anymore.
Yeah. But
I just say I'm going hunting, and she's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, not a big deal."
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense. But I mean, again, like for guys who are just like trying to fill the freezer, for guys that are trying to, you know, want to get out and scout, want to go look at some new terrain, all that stuff. I think this is something that nobody has like brought up or talked about. So that, like I said, that's why I wanted to bring you on here and kind of talk about that, because obviously it's working for you, you know. In that
to a
regard.
point.
Well. But I guess in the same thing is like it's not hurting, and it's certainly, you know, at least putting you in the ballpark of deer. And like I said, when you sent me into the no man's land, and then I seen a buck that I would have shot and some does, and that I had no idea why, you know, that it just kind of like kind of all clicked, you know.
Yeah, and I'm terrible at like explaining things, so it's like if I can just show you. Oh, like you've seen it when we've scouted like that spot that I scouted for like the Patreon hunt when I set that camera up there. Like it's just easier for me to show you because, dude, I can't explain anything.
And I can tell you this, that it was a good spot, a place that I would have put a camera and all that stuff. But I can tell you that Jake is not a good listener either. Because I told him, I said, you don't want to walk across there because it might not have a bottom. And then he says, well, the next time I went to get my camera, I got stuck in the mud.
And that wasn't even there, though. That's the problem. Cattails will get you.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess we'll kind of close it out like on this year's deer, like kind of tell that story of like when you guys kind of came across that deer and how you shot this deer out from underneath your uncle.
Oh yeah.
And you know, you steal my thunder, all these things.
Oh yeah. Well, I can't take credit for like any of the deer that I shoot. Like, dude, I don't think I deserve any of them either. Like, I don't feel like I put enough work, like, you know, that whole guilt thing, and you know, but like the system, I wouldn't even call it like a system. Like the team like that I grew up with, because like out of my whole family, like, I mean, it started like my grandpa on my mom's side, and like we all hunted, and even like my brother doesn't hunt now, so it's just like down to my dad, my uncle on my mom's side, and then me. So you can like, there's lots of ways that you could hunt with 3 people. Like we spread like our resources out, because I mean, you know, I have a bunch of cameras. So if you add up a bunch of cameras across the board between 3 people, and like you just spread that out really thin, or you know, wide, right? And then you just start narrowing stuff down between like what they have, you know, and then what I have. And if you can hunt with those people, like, and you can share all your stuff, like, I don't care, like, if they shoot deer out of my spots or, like, I shoot deer out of their spots type thing. It's like, you can kill a lot more deer that way. So, and you can kill a lot more big deer. So how this, like, all came about is, like, my dad he's pulling a John right now, building a house, so he doesn't, I think he's hunted, like, 5 times this year. So it's basically just all on me and my uncle, right? And we have a bunch of spots, like his old spots that we just like throw cameras in. And you just like leave them. So it would have been middle of summer. We get a velvet picture of the deer that I shot this year. Like we're thinking so. And so we're like, all right, well, we've got a whole list of big deer, right? And I had a spot that was 400-ish yards away from his. And so, like, we're kind of, throwing pictures back and forth, and, like, we're scouting, we're, like, going out together, and then, like, we're checking his, and then I'm, like, checking mine and stuff like that. And then, like, fast forward, I don't know if we got another picture of him. We might have gotten one, like, early September, and then we got a picture of that deer in, like, the 29th of September. And then we get another picture of him on the 1st. So the 29th of September, he's at like 12 o'clock at night. Then 1st, he's in there at 7. And you're like, I mean, somebody could like really make a strong play on this deer if everything's, adding up. So fast forward, like we make it through. My uncle shoots a buck. I sent you pictures of that one. Like the second day of the season. And like me just joking around with him. I'm like, hey, just go shoot another one so I can go shoot that deer out of your spot on Saturday. And he's like, yeah, like the whole family banter, right? Because me and him, we do a bunch of stupid shit to each other. And he was like, yeah, we'll see. Well, come to that Saturday, I hunt like down here, and like I wasn't seeing what I wanted, so I was like, well, I'm gonna jet north, and I'm like trying to figure out what the plan is, because he's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna hunt tonight. I'm like, all right, whatever. I was like, well, if you do that, I'm just gonna go sit in my spot, right? And he was like, all right. He's like, I'll let you know. So he texted me back a little bit later, and he's like, hey, he's like, you can go sit on my camera because I'm not going to go tonight. And I'm like, all right. He's like, I was like, I'm going to, like, I'll ask my dad. So I asked my dad, I'm like, hey, you want to go sit in his spot? I was like, and then I'll just go hunt mine. Because it's like, I mean, he can hunt, I can hunt. Doesn't really matter, right? So I told him, I'm like, he's thinking about it. He's like, yeah, we can do that. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then like 20 minutes later, he's like, you know what? He's like, I think your mom would kill me if I went hunting tonight. He's like, 'cause my mom was gone, whatever. He's like, I think I'm just going to stay and work in the house. And I'm like, okay. He's like, where are you going to sit? And I'm like, I don't know. I really want to go sit in my spot. But Donnie's like, you should go sit in mine. So I'm like, all right, whatever. Like, I got a picture of the big deer. I was like, I'm just going to go hunt that, right? So I go in, like, I take a shower, because, well, 75 degrees that day. So I was like, well, I'm going to go take a shower, get everything all squared away. And then I walk out there, and the access on this piece is a giant pain in the butt for where, like, we suspected this deer to be. So he's on, like, the north end of this, right? Well, the wind is blowing every which direction but right. But it's blowing strong. So I was like, all right. So I cut, like, as far south as I can. So I'm 500 yards south of, like, this tree. And I walk clear all the way past this tree, like, on my pin. And I'm running the tracker the whole time. And I walk, like, in the straight line where this tree is, I walk, like, 150 yards, 175 yards past it. And then I make a turn, and I'm walking along. And this is where, like, the stoner hippie deer thing comes into place, because I had that stupid tie-dye shirt on. And I come across, like, a giant scrape, and, like, in-season scouting, I'm just like, oh, you know what, I'm going to, like, mark this for a later date. And, like, if I have to pee, like, dude, I will pee in, like, every scrape I find, right? So I'm just sitting there getting my stuff back together, cooling back down. And I just happen to, like, get this weird feeling that, like, something's watching you, or, like, that something's there, right? And I just happen to look off to, like, my right, and there's one of those, like, that 3-year-old 10, one of the 10s that I sent you, just standing there at 15 yards, facing away from me. The wind's blowing so hard, he never even heard me, like, come walking in. And, like, the funny story is, like, like how owls, like they turn their heads real slow. Dude, that's all he did. Turned, looked at me, didn't like know what I was, didn't care, and just bounded off. Did like 2 bounds, and he just kept on walking. And like, if I didn't know that that deer existed, like the one that I shot, I would have probably like set up in that like general area, right? But I was like, no, I was like, I'll just keep pushing. And so, like an hour later, I get to that tree. So I get everything set up. I'm like super quiet. Like you'll get like, I've never had this feeling to where, you know, like you just felt everything was good. Like your access was clean. Like your setup was clean. Like everything just felt right. And I'm like, all right. I'm like, well, tonight's gotta be the night. Like everything was super, like I was keyed in the whole time. Like I set up my camera arm and I like left my phone in there, never touched with anything. And then right about 6:55, 7 o'clock, well, 6:50, I'm like stood up and I'm like, all right. I'm like, well, this is the time. I haven't seen a deer like all set. I'm like, if he's going to show up, he's going to show up right now. And it's going to be fast. And big deer do like big deer things. Like as far as like their like behavior and mannerisms and like what, like the sounds that they make. And I could hear him like just start. I could never see him, but you could just hear him like slowly working his way down that ridge. And he started doing his like, he was clicking, like popping, like crunching on acorns. And I'm like, dude, that's that deer. That's that deer. And I'm like, all right. So we'll stay on it. And like, I grabbed my bow and I'm like, all right. So I just grabbed, as soon as I heard him, like I just turned my phone on and I just let it run. So it's like a 7-minute video. And I could see him walk through, but I could never see like what was on his head. And I knew it was going to be fast just by like how everything set up. And he was like, all the pictures that we got of him, he's checking a scrape. And you only ever got 2 pictures of this deer, like one in front of the bush, which you've seen, and then one where he clears that bush, and then you have nothing else of it. And so I was like, well, as soon as I seen that he was coming down, I was like, all right, here's the play. And when he comes down fast. And it's 23 yards. And the video, I mean, a lot of people have seen the video now because of Austin's thing, but the video doesn't explain to like how close it was. Because that arrow, like when that arrow went by, like I knew he took a step forward, but I couldn't shoot like that step forward because of that tree. Like I'll play things close, but like on a deer like that, I wasn't going to play it like that close. So it's probably like 4 inches from that tree. And like I didn't have to stop him. He stopped on his own. Everything just felt right. And then, yeah, I shot him. And I'm like, I'm just sitting there, like right off the bat. Like I try to call my dad because he's always like the first one. So I call him twice and he doesn't answer. And I'm like, all right. So I call my uncle. He doesn't answer. So I'm like, try to call my dad again. Doesn't answer. I'm like, all right. So I call my aunt. Because this is like basically the whole running joke is it's my uncle's deer, right? Granted, like it's all of our stuff. We like share it, whatever. But he's like, I call my aunt. My aunt's like, why is Jake calling me? Like to my uncle. And my uncle's like, he looks outside and he's like, hand me the fucking phone. And he picks it up and he's like, did you just shoot my fucking deer? I'm like, yeah, I shot it. He's like, well, don't go get him yet. He's like, I want to come see him. And he's like, how big is he? And I'm like, oh, he's as big as like we think he is. Like I told him, I'm like, dude, he's close to like 150 all day. And he was like, all right. He's like, well, he's like, I'll run up there. He's like, just give me like a couple hours. He's like, and then I'll be up there. I'm like, all right, cool. And so, like, in the middle of that phone call, my dad calls me back. My dad, like, super nonchalant guy, right? He's like, yep. He's like, I was walking back in the house because I was doing something. And he's like, I seen the light on my phone. And he's like the light on the phone. He seen it was me, and he looks outside. And he was like, yep, he shot that deer. And I like, he called me, and we're talking about it. He's like, you gonna sit till dark? And like, his thing is like, you never know, like another one might come through. And like, me being like super amped on how it is, like I would have just like, because I shot him pretty good, but I was kind of iffy about it. And he's like, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, well, I ain't sitting any longer. I was like, I just shot the biggest deer on this whole chunk. I said, I'm not sitting any longer. I said, I don't care. He's like, well, which way did you go? And I'm like, I know he went that way, like to the north. I said, I'm going as far south as I can to get out of here. And he's like, what are you bringing out with you? I says, I'm leaving my pack and I'm leaving my bow, like right in front of this camera. I says, because obviously we're gonna come right back here. But I said, I'm gonna check blood, and then I'm like beating feet out of here. Like, I'm taking the longest way possible. And he was like, all right. He's like, well, I'll meet you at the van then, when you get out. And I'm like, all right, cool. And like the whole walk back, I'm just thinking like, there's no way. I don't deserve any of this stuff. I don't deserve any of these deer. Like, I didn't think like shooting deer like this, like on a consistent level, like here, was possible. It's like, I mean, 19, 20, like, so out of like the last 5 years, like I've shot like 5 like good bucks and like 3 great ones. And it's just like, it's just like kind of hard to explain. Like, and I'm terrible, like, that, like I can ramble just about anything, and I can't explain like anything super great, but I can show you exactly what I'm looking for. But I don't know. I just say it's all luck. There's no skill.
Well, but I think that there's a real component to that, because there's a lot of people who can recite all this stuff, and they know, like, oh, this is what you're looking for. You're just looking for the upper third. You're looking for the leeward side. You're looking for downwind bedding and all this stuff. And Eric and I had a lot of conversation on our drive down to Tennessee, and it's like, just to go, like, if you don't go in and try and figure it out, if you, like, let's say that you have all of that terminology down, and you just go find that one spot and you just sit there because it's upper third, leeward edge, it's the X marks the spot, it's all that stuff, and you don't see anything, or you do see something, like you didn't really learn anything. Yeah. It maybe just validated that one thing that one time. But like, I feel like the guys who are just like straight up killers, a lot of them can't explain it. They just go, and that's the like woodsmanship portion of it, is like being able to go in and do it, right?
And that's like the conversations that like I have with my dad and my uncle, because like, I mean, like, even Greg's talked about this, like back in the old days, like they didn't have cameras like we do now. Like, I feel it's a lot easier now than what it used to be. Like, my dad was telling me back in the day, like, he would rake out runways, like, just to find a big track. And, like, little stuff like that. And he might not, like, explain it. Like, he can explain it better than I can. But as far as, like, I never, like, I can ask him questions. And, like, because he doesn't ask me questions. Like, I ask him all the questions. And, like, I'll bounce ideas off of him. And he would, like, his number one thing is he said, just go in there and figure it out. He's like, you won't know unless you know. He's like, I could tell you, like, time and time again, that, like, yeah, this might work, this might not. But I can tell you over the last like handful of years, like it's been like I've boogered way more deer than I've shot just by trying to figure stuff out. And it's all like it's and I feel like I've had a good teacher, and as far as like he doesn't have to explain it to me, but like the whole thing, like I can read what he's thinking or like what he's doing. But like where I like stepped up as far as like Alex's thing is just getting lost. Like just trying to find new stuff and just getting lost. And like I could take what I've learned from all the spots that I've found. And yeah, they might not work. Like there might not be the deer that I want to like kill. But the spots that I have big deer in, like all that stuff overlaps. Like if you can just keep adding like wins into like I've had a bunch of losses, but like if you can just start stacking little wins as far as like that spot that I sent you, like I didn't know that there was anything in there other than like what I scouted during gun season, and I went in there and found like 2 or 3 little bucks, and then shortly after that, like the next sit, like in the same section, I had that 6-point that he told me I should shoot, but I never shot. But I'm like I just start stacking small wins, and then obviously they start to pay off on bigger deer is my whole, like if I can get more time in the woods and start stacking wins like in my favor, like they're all gonna fall one way. And like the last handful of years, they've all started to fall like in the right direction. But I'm not saying like at some point in time it'll stop. But like as far as I can ride this whole lucky train, I'll just keep doing that.
Yeah, well, the further you walk and the more spots you collect, the luckier you get, right? So, but man, I appreciate you coming over and kind of talking about this. I know that you've wanted to be like under the radar for a while now.
This is it. I'm one and done.
It's not your coming out party?
No. I only said I would do yours. I had to do yours first before I did anybody else's, and I don't think I'm doing any more after this.
Well, we appreciate it. But like I said, I think it's going to help like especially like a lot of the guys in the Patreon group who, there's a lot of guys that really have the drive. But we think of it all as like, we have to go sit, we have to go do this. And, even going down hunting with Brad when he was saying like, I got to be in the woods at this time. And we're just like running around like crazy. And not that we know what we're doing, but at the same time, like when you talked about like getting lost and all that stuff, I think you have to and I would imagine that the amount of time that you spend in the woods wandering around with a gun gives you a lot more confidence in like that woodsmanship or like being able to not get lost. You know what I mean? So I think that's going to help a lot of guys. So I really appreciate you coming over here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks.